tonight. So I thought we was going to finish last week, but instead we had game night. So hope everybody had a good time at game night. I had a good time at game night.
I did too.
All right. So just want to catch us up. It's been just a little bit. Jacob is dying. Jacob is on his deathbed, and he's called all of his family together. And we have read through the first 6 blessings. Okay? And so just to recap, Reuben, Reuben was the firstborn. Reuben had the right of inheritance, the right of leadership for the family, but his father took all that away from him, right? Because Reuben had an affair with one of Daddy's wives, not his mother, one of his other wives, okay? So he said Reuben had no discipline. He had no character. He was like a flood. The water just went wherever, okay? Next were Simeon and Levi. He said they were 2 of a kind. He said they were cruel. He basically said, I don't want nothing to do with you. I'm glad you don't include me in any of your meetings, okay? Which is some pretty harsh statements, but there was no. Now, what we'll notice, right, as we go through this, he's comparing each of his sons to some natural phenomenon, generally animal, right? Reuben, of course, he's a flood, right? So the water just goes everywhere. But for Simeon and Levi, you guys are just over the top cruel, and he had no comparison. There was just no comparison for them. Judah is a lion. Okay, so Judah is the first one that he comes to that has get this out of y'all's way. That has any type of a favorable. Judah's 4th born, and Judah is basically here inheriting the firstborn's status, okay? So Judah has been elevated to basically receiving the firstborn status. And he's a lion. He's strong. He's majestic. We see in Judah that he will be the line of kings, and that he will also be the line of Messiah, right? The lawgiver. And so we see all of that, or we saw all of that in his blessing, okay? Zebulun will make his business sea trade. And that's pretty much, Zebulun was just one of the average sons, okay? Naphtali, we talked a little bit about him. He was compared to a donkey, a mule. He was very strong. He was a worker. And he was sure-footed and steady, loyal, that kind of thing. And so that brings us to now son number 7, and that's Dan. Now, we're going to be in chapter 49, if you want to catch up in your Bibles. Chapter 49, and we're going to pick up with verse 16. That's where we're going to be, okay? Genesis chapter 49, verse 16. Now, reading out of the New Living Translation, and we're going to, as we go through tonight and talk a little bit, kind of going to jump back and forth. There's a little bit of difficulty in bringing some of this imagery into modern day concepts. And New Living Translation is not as good as the King James or the NIV in doing that in 2 or 3 places here. Dan will govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. Huh? Oh, yep. Oh, okay. Thank you, sister.
Trying to get you to speak fast.
Oh, okay. Let me speed up here. Dan will govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. Dan will be a snake beside the road, a poisonous viper along the path that bites the horse's hooves so its rider is thrown off. I trust in you for salvation, O Lord. Okay? Now remember, this is Jacob, the father, speaking. And he's addressing each one of his sons. And so he tells Dan, you're like a snake beside the road. So let's look into this a little bit, okay? So first of all, let's talk about the word govern here is better translated as judge, okay? It's not that he will govern his people, he will judge his people. Genesis. This is our pastor. Okay, here it's judge, right? Now, this is possibly a reference to the early days of Israel after they'd come across the River Jordan, and a reference to Samson. Okay, Samson was a Danite, but Samson in microcosm is a perfect example of Dan, right? And we see this if we study Dan. He was a mighty man of faith. Samson was, right? He judged righteous judgment. But what was Samson's problem?
Woman.
Philistinian women, right? If he had a weakness, it was Philistinian women.
That was his kryptonite.
That was his kryptonite, right? He couldn't keep his hands, literally could not keep his hands off of them. And in fact, it was Delilah, right? That was his undoing, right? She shaved his head. He had the vow of a Nazarite. The vow of a Nazarite was no wine. And you think, well, that's good, right? There's no drinking. But he also couldn't cut his hair. And while he gave the Philistines fits, right? If you read through, that was mostly who he protected Israel from. He had to go chasing after those women. And so Dan, what we learn is as we go through there, we learn that Dan became later on an idolatrous nation. They were cultish. They became worse than the pagans they displaced in the Promised Land. Okay, and so Samson is this in microcosm. Now the comparison here with a viper or a snake. And this is an interesting image. The snake lives alone. Okay, and what we see later on when the children of Israel move into the Promised Land is Dan is allotted a specific parcel, right? Each of the tribes were given a specific parcel of the Promised Land. Dan was no exception. And yet we see in later years, and when I say later years, I mean, a couple of hundred, we get up into the era of the kings, we see Dan suddenly moves north into a non-Promised Land region, okay? And so they become basically strangers in their own homeland, all right? And so this verbiage here as Jacob is dying seems to point to that tendency or that move that they became loners, if you will, in the nation. Now, as I said before, they became an incredibly idolatrous nation. And if you look at some of the wording as you go through the kingdom years, it seems like as bad as the rest of Israel was, because you remember that as you go through the kingdom years, you see this pattern. Actually, you see it even before the time of kings. You see a pattern emerging, right? They'll be righteous and they'll live righteous and holy for a while, and then things will get good, right? and then they'll start to drift off. And they'll get over here into idol worship, and they'll be doing all kinds of crazy things, and the bottom will drop out. Famine, foreign armies. It just gets bad. And then they come rushing back. Oh God, save us. And God will raise up a hero and to deliver them. And oh, this is great. And they'll live righteous and holy for a while. And then they'll kind of go back. Even through all of that, Dan seems to be worse at the pagan stuff than the rest of Israel. Okay? Seems to be just incredibly. And honestly, we haven't changed, right? And we're not Jewish, but we're the same way, right? Things will be going really, really good, and what do? We'll say, man, I don't need to go to church anymore. Things are really good, and we'll quit going. I cannot tell you the number of people who come through the doors on a church, marriage in shambles, life is a ruin, and they come to church, and things start to straighten out, and as soon as the pressure comes off, back out the door they go. I don't need God anymore. Everything is fine. And you see them, some months or weeks later, and whatever it was they'd come to church to fix is blown up, right? We're the same way. Well, that's kind of what was going on in the nation of Israel at the time. But Dan seemed to be worse than all of the others. And this may be why, and we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, this may be why Dan is not in the roll call of nations when we get to Revelation. Right? And no, I did not rhyme that on purpose because I'm not a poet and I know it. Oh. So Dan is not listed, right? We don't see Dan anywhere. And this has led to all kinds of theories about the serpent here. Some theologians think, well, because Dan is tied back to an obviously satanic symbol, that the tribe of Dan is the tribe from which the Antichrist will spring. There's no concrete evidence for this. There's nothing that says, yea, verily, from whence, but right, and we studied Revelation, and what did we find, right? The beast. There was a beast that came from the land. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And there was a beast that came from the sea. Okay? And in prophetic study, anything rising from the land was considered to be from the nation of Israel. Anything from the sea was the world at large. Okay? And so the Antichrist, the false prophet, came from the sea, but the Antichrist came from the land. And so if you start putting two and two together, that's why they end up here. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't true. I'm just saying if you hear it, that's where it's coming from. If somebody says, oh yeah, it's going to be this way. We don't know. We don't know. The Bible isn't clear. But I don't want you to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I've never heard that. No, you've heard it before. And, weigh it carefully. All right? Whatever this original vision is, whatever it is that Jacob is seeing, it causes him, as a part of his blessing, to cry out, I trust in you for salvation, O Lord. Now, it's not clear whether this exclamation that Jacob makes is about himself, right? Or his other sons, or for Dan personally, right? Dan, you're going to be in so much trouble, right? You're going to be sneaky. You're going to attack people, like it says, at the heels, right? Like a snake, unseen, a serpent. And he just cried out for Dan's salvation, right? Oh, Lord, save him. Save him from himself, right? So we don't know. But whatever it was that Jacob was seeing, it created in him this emotion. I trust in you for salvation, O Lord, right? And so he continued, and that's all he says. That's all we get.
It's like he's talking about all of his sons, and the different characteristics or whatever, and all of a sudden he talks not trusting you.
Right. Exactly.
In the middle of nowhere.
Right. In the middle of nowhere, it would seem, out of left field. And so it's not clear what he was meaning by that. Was this a personal plea for Dan, or was he seeing something in Dan and was making a plea for the rest of the family? We don't know. We don't know. But it is. And also keep in mind that prophecy, prophetic word, is always vague when you're trying to figure out what it means. When you're looking back, when it's happened and you're looking back at it, you go, oh yeah, that's easy to see, right? You think about, well, why is that? Well, think about this. How many times have we read reference to something, and we'll read it again tonight, read reference to something, oh, that's obviously pointing at Jesus, right? But yet, in those moments, in those times, the contemporary, the people who were living at that moment, listening to that prophecy real time, they didn't know what it meant. They were looking for, so well, what does that mean? Right? We have benefit of having a historical event to compare to, right? And people back in this time, like Jacob, and we'll see this in a minute, he refers to the Almighty God, the God of his salvation, right? We saw that. He didn't know what salvation was. Not the way we understand it. He knew only that God will deliver me. But he did not have a name. Right? So his trust, his faith was blind. God will deliver me in some unknown time, by some unknown means, through some unknown name. If he lived today, right, what would he say? My salvation was bought for me at Calvary, on the hill, on the cross, through the blood of Jesus Christ, right? And so we have all these details now that we can point back to. He couldn't do that. Okay, so now he brings Gad, Asher, and Naphtali kind of together here. He says Gad will be attacked by marauding bands, but he will attack them when they retreat. Asher will dine on rich foods and produce food fit for a king. And Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. And you're like, what? Okay, how does this? I imagine those three brothers are standing around going, are you sure he's still with us? I mean, he hasn't lost it yet? So let's take a look at this. He says, Gad will be attacked by marauding bands. Gad will be at war. And even when, if we look forward into the kingdom years, Gad was kind of a borderland tribe. And so they always suffered the first incursion by raiders, right? And so in those days, if you were a pirate band, for lack of a better term, you sweep in, come across the border, raid a couple of farms, and sweep out. Anybody ever watch the old West movies? You know, when Texas was trying to be settled, and we still had Indians. And what would they do? They'd sweep in, hit a couple of farms, and be gone back into the mountains. Well, that's kind of what he's talking about here, the marauding bands. He said Gad is going to be attacked. He's going to live a life at war. But he also says that he will, let me see, it says he will attack them when they retreat. And so he alludes to the fact, and if you served in the Marine Corps, I didn't do this on purpose, but it's like a Marine's mental toughness, right? Gad is going to be tough when it comes to this. He's going to be attacked, but it's not going to defeat him, right? He's going to respond, chase down the enemy, and attack them, okay? And so he will not accept defeat. He will counterattack as the enemy recedes and score the victory. And this is an important characteristic for us to understand, right? How many of us have felt attacked by life itself, right? The bills, the strained relationships, right? And it just seems like it keeps on. It just hammers and just hammers and just hammers, right? And we need a mental toughness, something that refuses, like Gad here, something that refuses to accept defeat. Right? You know, when you accept defeat, then life gets interminably hard. So I remember I wanted to become a master electrician. And so I was encouraged in this professionally by my boss at the time. And so I started to go to night school. And the guy running the program at the college, he said, you're going to have to come here for just about 4 years and take these classes in order to be prepared to go take the test. Houston, it was all city tests at that time, and Houston was in the top 8 or 9 cities as far as difficulty to pass that test. And so I was like, okay, that's fine, you know, I can do that. And I started the course, and every week he would give a test. We would cover something, and then he would give a test. And the first semester that I was studying, this I did not score more than 25 on any test. And this is on a test designed that 100 was passing. And since this was working class professional adult men and women, I think there were a couple of them in the class when I first started, right? There's no curve, right? And no whining. 25. And I'm like, and I've been a high C, B student all of my life, and I'm making a 25. So there's a word for that. Fail. Right? And so after the first semester, I went to him, I said, I'm just not getting it. And he goes, what do you mean you're not getting it? And I said, I'm scoring 25. My highest grade at that point was something like a 29 or a 30. He goes, oh, you're doing great. I said, well, doing great. I can't even score a 25. What do you mean doing great? He said, look, he said, you're misunderstanding. He said, my class is hard. He said, if you score, the day you score a 40 to a 45 in my class, he said, you're ready to take the test. You'll pass the test. That's how hard mine are, right? And he said, don't accept defeat, right? That's what he told me. When I finally, after 4 years, I went and took the test. And I took the test, and it was an all-day test. I got to tell you, it's an 8-hour test. Okay? They let you out for lunch. You get 3 hours. You get 3 hours of closed book memory work. You get an hour for lunch, and then you get 4 hours of calculation, open book calculations. And the closed book test is the easy part. Okay? And so after 7, I didn't even finish. I still had 4 or 5 questions on each part. I just couldn't. I went home, I had a headache, I was just exhausted. I learned 2 things. First of all, there was nothing on the test I hadn't seen before. And secondly, I realized I let the test beat me. Right? I went in there already accepting defeat. I didn't have it here. I wasn't, right? No mental toughness. Huh?
You let it psych you out.
I let it psych me out. So when I went and took the you could go back and take it in. I went, took it back again. I took the test again, passed it. I'd love to tell you that I aced it. But I didn't ace it. But I passed it. Right? And I never looked back. And that was the one thing is a 70 was passing, and you could argue your answers. And the instructor used to tell us, he said, when you're arguing your answers with the chief engineer at the city, he said, as soon as he agrees and you get a 70, stop talking. Because you know what the difference is in a master electrician that made a 70 on a test and one that made 100 on a test?
30 points.
Nothing.
30 points.
Nothing. Because they both got the same license, right? So Gad here, he had a mental toughness, and that's what Jacob was talking about. He said there's a mental toughness that you could be beating him. You can have him on the ground. You can have your hands around his throat. And in his mind, he's like, I got him right where I want him. Hey, brother. But Brother Shane just wants attention sometimes. So he's like, hey,
he's like that.
He's like that. It's okay.
And if you believe that, you know nothing about Brother Shane.
But he had a mental toughness, right? If you were, how many of y'all have ever seen that poster, that stork eating a frog, and the frog's got his head's down in the stork's mouth, but his hands are down around the stork's throat, and he's choking him out, right?
Never give up.
Right? Never give up. Right? This is Gad. Don't accept defeat. Even if they're beating you to a bloody pulp, you need to be going like, I'm winning this fight. I got him right where I want him. Right?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Gad was bad and he was totally rad.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I do it too.
Gad was bad and he was totally rad. But they were known.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I know. I got to give him something because it takes him a while to come up with it.
Well, I'm slower than an electrician that made a 70 on his final exam.
That's right. It was 74.
That was on one of them gimme tests.
It was a 74, brother. Don't be taking my points away from me.
What's the difference?
That's right. That's exactly right. Tell you what. Let me show you what the difference is here. I got it in my wallet. All right. Gad became known in the kingdom years. He was the guy you wanted on your side. They were fierce, cunning warriors, right? Trying to think of it. It was in the Middle East. It was during either Desert Storm or the one that followed. They were interviewing some years after the fact. They were interviewing, I think, some French soldiers and somebody else, some other soldiers from Europe. And they, in the course of talking to them, they kept noticing that they kept referring to American soldiers. And so they finally started to zero in on that. And almost to a soldier, they would say, if you went anywhere in that theater, you wanted to be stationed near an American soldier. And they said, why? He said, because those guys never quit. He said, if just one of them got left behind, he said, the whole garrison was coming out to get them. And he said, yeah, no.
That was the French and the Dutch.
Yeah, okay, the French and the Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
No. But they wanted to be stationed with American soldiers because he said, they never quit. They keep coming, they keep coming, they keep coming. Gad was like that. They were known as cunning and fierce warriors in the kingdom years. Okay, now, Asher, the translation's a bit clunky. This is one of those where I was talking about. What it says is, if you read it, is Asher will dine on rich foods and produce food fit for kings. Okay, and so what it's really trying to say there, I'm missing a slide. Okay. What it's really trying to say there is that Asher will be so, he will be a farmer, he will produce, and he will produce so much that he will be able to afford to eat the finer foods. Not that he will produce food for kings, but that he will consume food fit for kings. Okay? And Asher they had some of the richest farmland in the promised land. And so he was the consummate farmer. Okay? And the next was his brother Naphtali. And again, also Naphtali's blessing is a little bit difficult to understand. So just to read it again, he's a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. So, no son ever said, "Oh, I'm a doe." Well, maybe today. Maybe today, who knows? But not back then for sure. But if we take the translation apart, it wasn't doe, it was deer, specifically a buck, or what was referred to in the ancient English world as a hind, okay, a stag, right, with ginormous horns. Think elk, okay. And so a deer or this buck roams free in the forest, is sure-footed and confident. How many of y'all have ever seen Bambi?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ashamed. I've seen Bambi. I cried.
I even rewatched it not too long ago.
There you go. I cried when Bambi's mother got shot by the evil hunter. I'm not saying anything about anybody in particular.
If you're looking at Charlotte, Donnie don't kill.
Well, that's true. Woo! Donnie, don't watch.
Takes a lot of shots for the camera.
He lets his wife.
I don't want to lose control, brother, but it's gone. Okay. So, but you remember at the end of the movie, I forgot where I was. You remember at the end of the movie, who does Bambi see up on the hill? That inspires him, right?
Daddy.
That big, majestic buck standing up on the hill, right? All the hunters are afraid of him, obviously, because nobody shot him, right? At least with a gun.
They're smarter than the
They all took pictures of him like Donnie.
I don't care if they still got milk on their lips. I'll shoot
Be
them.
All right.
That's the best he won.
So,
You better gain control, Pastor.
I think you're losing it. You remember where
So-
you're at?
I'm just running through scriptures here about hellfire and brimstone, fire down from heaven, no. So the beautiful fawns reference, right? It says he bears beautiful fawns. So the beautiful fawns reference could be a reference to ideas or inventions. We don't know. He could have been a very creative person, or the tribe. Or it could have been a reference to prosperity, increasing population, much like a wild deer herd. Okay, just the population increasing exponentially, right? Yeah. So now we get to Joseph. Okay, now Joseph has the longest of all the brothers. It's just a little bit longer than Judah. So Jacob spends a long time on Joseph, okay? Now, as it's written, New Living Translation, Joseph is the foal of a wild donkey, the foal of a wild donkey at a spring, one of the wild donkeys on the ridge. Archers attack him savagely. They shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained taut. His arms were strengthened by the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, by the rock of Israel. May the God of your father help you. May the Almighty bless you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the watery depths below, blessings of the breast and womb. May my fatherly blessings on you surpass the blessings of my ancestors, reaching to the heights of the eternal. Boy, yeah, I mean, he's really going after it, isn't he? I mean, Jacob just getting blessed left and right. Well, up and down anyway. May these blessings rest on the head of Joseph, who is a prince among his brothers. All right? So Joseph now is blessed. Now remember, he's already blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Be fruitful. Be prosperous. In fact, it was a compliment later on in Israel to say, may you be as Ephraim and Manasseh, right? May you be as successful and as blessed. Lots of children, lots of success in business, etc., etc. So Joseph has the longest oracle of the 12. Now, the New Living Translation, which we just read, interprets verse 22 as wild donkeys. Okay? It was felt by some scholars that all the others were being compared to animals, so too must Joseph's blessing be compared to an animal. Okay? In order for that to be right, you have to start making other exceptions, right? If you read it in the King James, it basically says, it calls him a bough and a vine, right? And that he's growing over a wall, okay? When you read it in the New Living Translation, suddenly he's a wild donkey running around on a hill, which is what everybody felt like it must have been, okay? But in order to start explaining it must be a donkey and not a tree or a vine, then you have to explain away the hill or the wall. The wall has to be a hill. It's a donkey on a hill, not a vine growing over the wall. Or you know, what does that mean? So I think that there was a point in time where the scholars basically forgot that Reuben's a flood, Levi and Simeon, they're not compared to anything, right? And so why does Joseph have to be compared to an animal? And I think that was one of the flaws. So if you look at the King James, it's in agreement with the original interpretation, the imagery of a vine or a tree. Verse 22, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Now, if you take this as your interpreted meaning, suddenly it fits in Joseph's life a little better. Okay? Because now the imagery is a vine or tree. How many of y'all have ever had a vine, a wisteria, or a potato vine, or Virginia creeper, right? Which looks a lot like poison ivy, but without the itch. What was the one that my mother had all the time? Wandering Jew. Right? And you plant that, if that stuff gets anywhere, it's everywhere. Okay? And suddenly then this becomes a little easier to understand, right? The imagery here is that the vine or tree cannot be contained. Right? Now you think about Joseph a minute. He's thrown into a well. He's sold into slavery. He's made a butler as a slave, right? He's thrown into prison. And yet everywhere that Joseph went, right, his reach grew. When he was a butler, the man didn't know what was in the house. He said, Joseph, just handle it. The man got rich because of Joseph's stewardship. He got thrown into prison. The warden didn't know what was going on in the prison because Joseph handled it, right? And then you got Pharaoh in Egypt, right? In the 7 years, and we just read through all that. And Egypt became a nation of incredible wealth, not because of Pharaoh and not because of an army, but because of Joseph. I was watching a documentary. They were talking about ancient things. And they found in Egypt, and not just recently, this was some time ago, but they found in Egypt depictions of Egyptians and going down into a hole in the ground and coming out with sacks of grain. And they realized that this was during a famine, and the storage, right? I glossed over this, right? I just said Joseph did what? He put away so much grain you couldn't even number how much was there. Right? Well, now think about it. He stored grain for 7 years. Now, it is a desert country, okay? But if you start piling grain in a room, in a silo, right? Anybody ever paid any attention to how silo works? Right? So what goes in at the top of the silo? Fresh. Where do they take the grain out of the silo at? The bottom. So the stuff that's oldest comes out first, right? And so they looked at these storage chambers that were built, and you would pour the stuff in the top, but you would go down into the bottom and come up several flights of stairs because you were pulling the old grain off the bottom. And they said this had to be what Joseph had done. He built all of these places and stored all of this grain. But no matter where he was planted, Joseph didn't just survive, he thrived. He became the most trusted man in a household. He became the most trusted man in a prison. You say, well, yeah, but he was still in prison. He was the most trusted man in a prison. And then he became the most trusted man in a nation. Right? And God sent him to prep school in a household. He sent him to college in a prison. And then he gave him a professional job, right, as ruler of a country. Well, second in charge, anyway. Okay? And so we see now that this vine, it's growing over the wall. Walls can't contain it, right? No matter what man does, no matter what wall man puts up around Joseph, he's able to overcome it, right? Now, important point here, the well. He's a tree planted next to a well. The well here is symbolic of God, the living water. The reason Joseph is able to overcome, to grow beyond the constraints that men have put around him, is not because of his own strength, but because of the spiritual strength he receives from God. Right? If you're having trouble getting outside of the walls of whatever life has put around you, I suggest you check your water supply. Right? What did Jesus tell us so many centuries after this? Oh, come on, somebody.
I will always be with you.
I will always be with you. That's good. That's good. Not what I'm looking for.
He said you will have troubles in this life.
Troubles. That's good too.
And the living water.
I am the living water. Yeah, you take a drink of me, and what comes out of you? Rivers of living water. What did he tell the woman at the well? If you drink my water, you never thirst again. Right? Jesus is the living water. It's no mistake or accident that a well, is featured in this imagery. The well is not on the outside of the wall that the tree is supposed to get to. The well is right next to where the tree is planted. Okay? So the water is the supply of strength here, right? The walls, of course, man, are life's restrictions or actions to subdue or restrain Joseph. So if you feel restrained, right, life restrains us. Right? People all the time, I see it on social media all the time. There was one gal on social media, and she was talking about how marriage is a construct intended to keep women down, and children are burdens that keep women from reaching their full potential. And I'm thinking, what? Really? Right? No matter what you think life is planted around you, the answer is not freedom on your terms. The answer is freedom on God's terms. Right? Go back to the well. This is one well you can't go back to too often. You ever heard that expression, gone to the well once too often? Right? This is one well that will always have something in the bottom of it for you. Right? Something that you can draw from. Because of the life-giving water, he overcomes the walls placed around him. These next verses that we read about recount his early trials. Okay, attacked savagely, but remaining strong in the faith, depending on God for strength to endure. I want to go back. It says they shot at him. Archers attacked him savagely. They shot at him and harassed him. But his bow remained taut. His arms were strengthened by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, by the rock of Israel. Okay. Most of us, when we face a problem, find that if we can face it head on, see it, right, we feel more comfortable, right? Okay, I can see what my problem is. My problem is milk. He's a little bigger than I am. Okay? A little taller, a little like this. But I can see him coming, and I can deal with it now. All right? When is it that we get discouraged, depressed, disillusioned? When we can't see it coming. We don't know where it's coming from, right? That's the reason the imagery here is archers, right? Archers. The arrow comes out of the blue, right? Where's this coming from? You don't know which way the arrows come from. You know, if you watched in the movies, right? When there's whatever the situation is, whenever there's a sniper and a single shot rings out, right? What do the people being shot at usually do?
Hit the ground.
Dive for cover, obviously, but they're like, where did he come from? They don't know what to do. They don't know which way to run. They don't know which way to fight because they don't know which way the attack is coming from. The archers, right? Joseph was attacked from a direction he completely didn't expect. His own brothers. Sold into slavery. Becomes a butler, head butler. Begins to be successful. Begins to have some prestige. And then what happens? An attack from a direction he never saw coming. The wife of the man that trusted him. Right? So that's what it's talking about. The attack came from everywhere. But yet, remember the imagery that we have here. Joseph is the tree who overcomes the wall. He reaches up and out and beyond the wall. Right? Now, the next reference here is his bow remained taut. Okay? Or tightened. And this imagery is not a bow at rest. It is a bow drawn back. Right? And so if anybody here besides Brother Shannon who's left the room now, a bow hunter? You know, they rate bows by what? By pounds of force, right? It's so many pounds to do this. And of course, then they came up with this really neat thing called a compound bow, right? Which multiplies the amount of force. You know, you might have a 75-pound pull, but when you release it, you've got 150 pounds going, down range, right? Now, how many of y'all have ever shot a bow and arrow, or used a bow and arrow, okay? How many of y'all, especially, I'm talking about not one for a 5-year-old, because I could do that all day. I mean, full, big bow, and pull it back, and how long can you hold it here?
You're going to hold longer than the old ones.
That's true. That's true. But how long? I mean, eventually, what you got to do?
You got to let it go.
You got to let it go.
Start shaking.
Right? Yeah, because you're like, this is what it's talking about. Joseph remained able to respond and defend throughout all these attacks. He never was weakened. Okay? He was able to draw and fire and draw again. And he was always able to defend. Right? Because of the faith. Because who was strengthening him? Right? The mighty one of Jacob. The shepherd. The rock of Israel. Right? This was the imagery that was given. His strength to endure these trials was supernatural. Not because, let me rephrase that, because he was special. But he wasn't special, if you get my meaning. He simply chose to believe and follow God. That's what made him special. It's a choice that we ourselves can make today. Right? Now, your choices will be different than mine. This is why Jesus told us, every man must pick up what cross? His cross. Your life is you're going to have different choices in your life than I have in mine. Because you're a different person. Right? And I'm sure your wife is thankful for that. Okay? We're different people. We have different troubles. And so our choices are different. But I must bear my cross. Right? So, I don't want nobody to raise your hand. Y'all keep your hands down. Keep your hands down, brother. For those of you who do not have a drinking problem, how hard is it to resist an invitation to go out to a bar drinking all night. It's easy. I don't need to be doing it. But for somebody with let's just say a taste for alcohol, that's going to be a different choice. It's going to be a different cross to bear, if you get my meaning, okay? And so what we see here is that Joseph was special, but he was special in that he was faithful, okay? He remained close to the well. And his roots were deep into the well, right? And Jesus talks a lot, got a lot of parables with imagery of roots, right? What did he say? The word of God, the kingdom of heaven is like a man that goes out to sow some seed, right? And some seed falls on the thorny ground or the hard ground, stolen immediately. Some falls amongst thorns and springs up and is choked out by the thorns. Some falls on rocky ground. It springs up, and when the sun comes out, what happens? It withers. Why? No root. Some falls on good ground, and it brings back harvest, right? Because it's got root. It can get down into root. What is the root? The Word of God. We get down into the Word of God. Okay, and so that's the well. We see allusions to God here as the mighty one, the shepherd, the rock of Israel, right? The rock. Again, we see all of these in response to Christ. Now, they didn't know who Jesus was, but they knew who God was. But they used this. It's amazing to me they used the same references: shepherd, rock. Right? This was Jesus, right? We see this stuff coming from Jesus. The reference in verse 26 to the God of your father brings us to a historical and family traditional sense of faith. Right? How many of y'all realize that faith can be passed down from parent to child? Right? Now, faith of a mother is very important, and I don't want to belittle that. But there are statistics that say if dad goes to church, if dad is a believer, the children are a much higher percentage. I forget what the numbers are now, 80 or 90%, that the child will be back in church or will stay in church for all of his life. Because dad is important, right? And here we see the God of your father, right? Jacob is alluding to this. Dads are important. Dads pass down a tradition of faith, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect example of faith. It just needs to be an example of true faith, okay? It's not like hair or eye color, right? It is by training, teaching, and example, right? If dad is getting up and going to church, right? It's an example. This is what men do. Men get up and go to church. Men pray. Men read their Bibles. Men refer to God in respectful ways, not only when I've smashed this thumb beyond recognition. Okay? So that's what that's talking about. Then we see references to heaven above. Blessings from heaven above. Watery depths below. And this harkens back to creation. So he's remembering how God created everything. He created all the different places. And so basically, blessings from God come from all directions. When God blesses, you'll be blessed from above, you'll be blessed from below. Breast and womb are basically many heirs, and we'll see this in later verses. Joseph's heirs became very numerous. Ephraim and Manasseh, they had bunches of kids, right? It was one of the larger tribes in Israel. Again, we see the fatherly blessing passes down to Joseph. All the blessings promised to Jacob by the Almighty said, may the blessings that were given to me be given to you. He didn't do that with Judah. Judah was given leadership and kingship, and the heritage of the Savior. But he didn't say, may my blessings be upon you. But for Joseph, he said, may all that God has blessed me with, may he bless you. Right? He's handing down those blessings. Right? I don't think we as modern adults take seriously enough the act of blessing our children. Right? Of laying our hands on them. Not when they're little, they need hands laid on them for different reasons. But blessing them. May God go with you, right? Even if we don't do this as formally as we see Jacob doing it, we do it when we bring them to church, whether they wanted to be here or not. Right? I don't care if you sit on the back row and sulk for an hour and a half. You're listening to a sermon today. Right? I'm blessing you. Don't you understand? All right? So, all of this is on the head, or basically given to Joseph. And finally, I know this is what you've all been waiting for, Benjamin. Benjamin is the youngest. He says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, devouring his enemies in the morning, dividing his plunder in the evening. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said as he told his sons goodbye. He blessed each one with an appropriate message. Benjamin, a ravenous wolf. Everything we've read about Benjamin in this story has been very passive, right? He's a boy. He's a lad. He's innocent. He's the apple of his father's eye. Oh my gosh, right? And all of a sudden his daddy's looking at him. Now this is 17 years, roughly 17 years after the big reveal, okay? So they've been in Egypt about 17 years when this happens. And all of a sudden, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, killing in the morning and dividing the carcass in the evening. I mean, wow. Right? What happened to Benjamin? Okay? But it's a glimpse of what he will become as a tribe, as a clan in Egypt. During the entry into the promised land, the period of judges and the time of the kings, during these times, the tribe of Benjamin is known for an aggressive character and a military prowess that belies their small population. So even though they were small, right, they fought like a huge army, right? So Dan is another one. So we have basically Gad and Dan, right? Those are the two tribes. You don't want to mess with them. It's the Marines and the SEALs, right? The warriors of Benjamin, I was hoping Brother Shannon would be in here for this. The warriors of Benjamin were renowned for their skill as left-handed marksmen and for their bravery. Okay? Benjamin tended to be left-handed. Benjamites tended to be left-handed. And they were not to be trifled with. Okay. So finally, final instructions. Verse 29, then Jacob says, soon I will die and join my ancestors. Bury me with my father and my grandfather in the cave of the field of Ephron the Hittite. This is the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as a permanent burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried. And I buried Leah. He wants to go home. He says, when I die, take me home. Okay? Take me home. And then, there's a plot of land, the cave that my grandfather Abraham bought from the Hittites. And when Jacob had finished his charge to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed. He breathed his last. He joined his ancestors in death. I will tell you this. The Old Testament has a really neat way of saying, and he died.
Yeah.
Right? He died. In the next few verses, we see Jacob throws himself on his father and weeps. And and so if we go back to, I think it's chapter 46, you remember when Jacob was coming down to Egypt the first time. You remember what God told him? when he found out Joseph was alive, and he stopped and asked God, is it safe for me to go? And God said, you go. He said, Israel will become a mighty nation there. He said, and Joseph will close your eyes. And that's what we see in the next few verses, right? He falls on his neck. He weeps for him. It doesn't record the other sons doing this, but Joseph, gone all those years, he'd gotten to spend the last 17 years of his father's life with him, and he closes his eyes. And they basically, Joseph gets with the physicians to embalm his father, which is unusual because usually that was the priests who did that. But that was a religious thing. And so Joseph didn't go to the priest, he went to the physicians, had the physicians embalm his father, and then took his father home and buried him just like he wanted to. And then we see when Joseph dies, he calls his brothers to him and he says, just like you carried my daddy home, when you leave the land that go back home, as God has promised that we will do, take my bones with you. And we will see that. Where did mine? There it is. Okay. We will see that in the Exodus. And so that's now set the stage for us to begin our study of the Exodus, which is the next book in the Bible. But we won't read the whole book, but we're gonna look at the story of Moses and the Exodus next. That's where we're going next. Okay? So that we now understand how Israel got into Egypt and how Egypt became such a wealthy nation. And these two things are critical to understand the true nature of the Exodus. All right. Any questions? Any